Welcome to the Momentom Collective podcast. Momentom Collective provides training spaces and community around the world for unconventional minds and nomads to co-create the future. This podcast shares ideas on how we can transcend and shift towards our highest self. On our 8th edition of the podcast, co-founder of Momentom, Gabrielle Bonneville sits down with Momentom resident and yoga influencer Daniel Rama to pick his brain about yoga, meditation, and the body and mind connection.
With name and where you're from, actually.
My name is Rama, or Daniel Rama, and I'm from Canada originally.
Cool.
Although just to add to that, I would probably say as far as home, I identify far more with this ashram in the Bahamas.
Right, because
than I ever did with Canada.
If you were to describe what you do, how would you describe it? 1 or 2 sentences.
I would say that I facilitate improvement.
Okay, and if I were to ask you what your passions are, what would they be?
Facilitating improvement. My passions, I mean, it looks like they're things that have to do with yoga and handstand and meditation, but those are just methods, those are just tools. The real thing behind them is, again, it's just improvement, helping people become better people.
Has that always been what fuels your passion?
Oh, no. No. From 19 back down to, probably not all the way to 0, but the majority of it, most of my life was spent completely different activities. So prior to, I was fueled by those things that many young men are fueled by, probably in a greater degree than most. But it has definitely not always been improvement that I've been passionate about.
Would you think that the YTT was a contributor to that shift in purpose in your life?
Me taking a yoga teacher training?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the wheels were already in motion at that point, and I really desired some powerful change. And this is a common theme in my life. I didn't necessarily have the power to make those changes under my own steam. So there have been a few experiences that were the necessary catalyst for me to make those changes. So yes, TT definitely helped quite a lot.
So obviously you do a lot more than yoga. First, how do you describe what yoga is? And second, what other movement modalities are you inspired by?
Okay. Let's start first with the gross ones, the more accessible ones. So movement modalities. I've been inspired by a lot of different things, mostly when you talk physicality, mostly through functional movement, little calisthenics, a lot of circus-style hand balancing. When I was 12, I also was a Canadian national level gymnast, which I did it for 9 months. I was fantastic at it when I did. Some videos of myself wearing these little unitards and doing all these things. So yeah, I was influenced by a couple different things at the start, but they all kind of progressed more towards yoga. They progressed towards essentially the study of things that elevate your perception of life. And that's what yoga is. Yoga is simply a method, a tool for starting to experience things in a little bit more realistic sense. Yeah? It's not just asanas, it's not just breathing exercises, it's not just relaxation, any of these kinds of things. Those are also tools within the science of yoga, but what yoga is it's simply a method through which you start to experience life the way that it is.
Our residents were at your class on the 10 ways of making yoga more practical or practically used in everyday life.
Right.
We'll put a link on this so that people can see everything you talked about in terms of diving deeper on what yoga is and the 8 limbs as well. So it's really interesting when you talk about perception, because at the end of the day, yoga is a way of refining more acute ways of observing the world and the experience of being within life. What do you mean by what's real, or to observe things as how they are?
Yeah, I mean just that. I mean that for the most part, people spend their time at the other end of the spectrum, where the things that we think are real, the things that we think are meaningful, or the things that we think will bring meaning into our life, for the most part, we have such a perverted understanding of those things. Yeah, we don't really see life the way that it is. We are, for the most part, very, very stuck within the realm of physicality. Yeah, we're very, very bound to this material world. And it's a beautiful thing. There's lots of wondrous aspects of physicality, yeah. But anybody who has explored physicality in a deeper way, they'll start to notice that there's something else a little bit beneath that surface there. So when you really start to experience something at the end of the spectrum with regards to physicality, you start to see through it a little bit. I've been spending so much time working with my body, and yet I'm not getting fulfilled. And, there's something else there. So yoga just shows you what is that something that's there that we're missing.
Yeah, because it is really interesting to see your physical practice. You're obviously really inspired and passionate and strong about your yoga practice. But you have mentioned a few times in residency that it isn't the ultimate goal for you. In fact, it is just like a passageway actually to have more comfortable seated meditations. Can you tell us a little bit about your meditation practice?
We'll start again on the most accessible level.
Okay.
So in the pursuit of anything, we'll talk for now about a physical goal, let's say handstand. In the pursuit of something like a handstand, the degree at which you need to actually apply your mind, it's quite high, yeah? The ability to observe the body in a very, very real sense. You will learn quite a lot about essentially how to fine-tune the mechanisms of the body, and the lessons learned along the path to something like a handstand, they will apply also to non-physical aspects of yourself. All of these messages we talk about in the handstand class, or if I have some class that touches on meditative techniques, what we're saying in all of those sessions is the exact same. Yeah. So the lessons that we learn while focused on physicality, they are stepping stones. They apply directly to dealing with the deeper aspects of the mind. So for me personally, although I have said before that I don't necessarily care about handstands, I don't necessarily care about yogic physicality or any physicality, it has some grounds. It has very, very real applications. But once you walk that path and you get those lessons, then you start to see it as a bit of a redundancy. It's fun every now and again to play with the body and all of these things, but I'm not really much a pursuer of just fun things. I want betterment, is what I want. And betterment, at least for myself, where I am right now, it's not coming from physicality. Yeah? Where it's coming from is a more meditative practice. Yeah? And meditation, in a very real sense, is understanding how to use the mind to get beyond the mind in a very paradoxical kind of way. This is what meditation is. Where we have, especially in modern times, this distortion of meditation. We think it's seated, just comfortable, maybe you're sleeping, you're thinking about something, maybe you're not thinking about something. Meditation in a true sense is no mind. It's completely getting over the mind. And when you do transcend this mind, when you're not necessarily bound by all these oncoming thoughts, you'll start to know truly who you are. You'll start to see the separation between what is this body-mind complex and what is who you really are. Yeah? And when you see that, when you experience that, something very interesting will actually happen, where that body-mind complex, it will become tremendously more useful, tremendously more intelligent. So if you can touch that space beyond body and mind, naturally you start to fine-tune, without doing anything physical, without doing anything mental, you start to fine-tune those layers of yourself as well.
So the body-mind complex, what is the mind?
Body-mind complex, the reason that I pair it together is that there are two aspects of physicality, actually. A lot of people will think that the mind is something very subtle, whatever. No, it's actually just gross matter as well. The body and the mind, they are in essence the same thing. Mind is just a little bit more subtle. They're both bound to the material universe. Yeah, there's nothing astral about it. It doesn't go beyond it all. Body and mind, they're limited to physicality. So we group them together.
So without body, we couldn't have mind.
Well, mind, for a while, I was trying to think of a way to explain it, and it can be quite difficult. A lot of people say, like, mind is inside the brain, or the question has come up a lot, like, where is the mind, for example? And the more I thought about it, I think the best analogy is a book, essentially. If you think about a book, you have the physical qualities, like the weight and the size and the texture, whatever, and this is the brain. And then you have the information within it, and this is the mind. It has actually no real location, no real way of defining it, so to speak, apart from the mind is the information that travels through our system. That's all that the mind is. And it is a tool through which we create the material reality, we perceive the material reality, but it's also the tool with which we get over that unreal material reality.
It's funny because it's almost as if you can't be active in overcoming your mind. It's almost like a surrender.
In a sense, you need to be active first.
Okay.
Yeah, there are definitely different stages. Like Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, in his 8 limbs of Raja Yoga, he says that there are 5 external limbs and 3 internal limbs. And those last 3 internal, they have to do with first concentration, then contemplation, and then meditation, which again is a state of no mind, no thought. Yeah. So while you're working within the realms of concentration and contemplation, here your mind is active, but in a very, very focused way. In essentially, after some point has come where you are able to focus to such a capacity, there will be somewhat of an invitation, at which point there is then no action. To have action, it implies that there's one who's acting, there's the action itself, and there's something the action is being performed to. So there's all these dualities, yeah? When you get beyond, there's none of that.
Yeah, that was one of my next questions. It's kind of like, what's the purpose? Where's the end goal for the practice of yoga in itself?
Yeah. So this is a good question. You know, many people, they don't actually ask this question. The question itself, I have some problems with. I'll take it that you mean, like, what is the purpose a little bit of life? Yeah, the purpose of yoga is just to understand life. So you would ask really, like, what is the purpose of life for the most part? And it's a valid question, yeah. But it's a question that we only really ask under certain circumstance. For example, if there was some individual who was just so ecstatically joyful, just blissed out all the time for no real reason, this person would never ever think to ask, what's the purpose of life? They would never ask this question, yeah. Only when we're not experiencing life in a truly blissful state would we ask a question like this. So it kind of answers a little bit, what is the purpose?
It's also just this, I guess the best way that I had ever heard it when I was younger was that it's a place called Samadhi, and Samadhi is where there is no differentiation between knowledge and the knower. And when I heard that, it's like, okay, so this is a space of unity, and I think this is what you refer to when you say to what is, because in essence it just boils down that we are energetic vibrations and we're all sharing the same space, and observing through a specific interface that can only observe very limited amount of intelligence around us. But I feel sometimes that we're here to experience duality. We are here to experience this, and I guess it is a great endeavor to return to that source, return to that oneness. But we'll get there inevitably, right? The only thing that we know is that we're going to die. So are we here to experience duality and enjoy the ride, or are we really here to be curious about our own evolution, our own transcendence?
They're the same to me. to experience this duality, if you really experience this duality, if you really start to notice the things that you see, that you experience through your senses, it will raise many questions. Like, what is really going on with all of these things? How is this happening? How am I moving my hand? You'll start to get very, very curious if you are really experiencing it. So they're one and the same, the question. And I mean, if we have these kind of curiosities, some people might not follow through, but I would like to think that for the most part, we start to seek a little bit. We start to inquire. And ultimately, that leads you to one place. So just by virtue of experiencing something properly, in a more real sense, yeah, it will lead you where you want to go, eventually.
Well said. I wanted to ask you, aside from, because we also touched on the mind already, but there is a train of thought that describes that thoughts are the precursor to our reality. And that our thoughts come into words, come into, the way that we create our realities. Do you think that there is a correlation between the thoughts that we think and the control of them in some way, and the things that we are experiencing in our external reality?
Every action that we actually will experience or perform is beginning as a thought. All action is beginning as a thought. So they're absolutely correlated. Yeah? It would not be possible to raise my hand if there was not first some thought that triggered some chemical signal that actually allowed the hand and the fingers to move. So they're also one and the same. It's the connection between the body and the mind. Yeah. The next question would be, where does the thought come from? Then? Yeah. So exactly when I find out for sure, let you know.
Well, in the same realm, what is intuition, and is intuition a form of thought? Okay,
so we have a few different voices that will be chattering around. Yeah, there's one voice that we call intuition. There's another one we call instinct, and these two voices, for the most part, they tend to be in conflict with one another. Now, it's a subtle form of thought, I would say. It has to be. If there was anything beyond thought, it would not be able to be bound by those rules of duality, so it wouldn't exist, essentially. It has to be a subtle form of thought, yeah. And essentially, this intuition is usually the voice that speaks first in most people, and then the instinctive mind, or the more animalistic mind, is the one that comes in and tries to counter. For the most part, we have these two voices going on. And if there's a question in somebody's life about, like, what's the next step? What's the next thing that I should do? You know what you should do next.
Yeah.
But you don't want to do it. This other aspect of your mind comes in. These other thoughts come in that say, oh, that's a very challenging thing. That's going to require so much effort. It'll either be too difficult, too uncomfortable, or it just seems like monumental, so we don't do it. For the most part, intuition is that higher aspect of our mind, that mind that is a little bit closer to the divine, and ultimately, if you are able to differentiate between the two and listen only to that aspect, you will get where you're supposed to go.
Well, that sounds like a lot about trust.
Trust is one thing, but it's a snowballing effect. Yeah, I can relate it to a bit my experience living in the ashram, where somebody tells you, if you do this specific technique for every day for the next year, then you'll have very powerful personal experience. But before that, you won't have any experience. You'll just be doing this uncomfortable thing every day. Yeah? So this is the idea. You have in the beginning, you need to trust a little bit your teacher, which this voice, this thought pattern that you speak of, this intuition, this teacher. Yeah. So if you trust this teacher a little bit, you'll see that actually the direction, the instruction that they're giving you is leading you in the place that you do want to go. Yeah? That first kind of act of trusting can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but once you do trust that, then the next time that the voice comes, you just, oh, that's that voice. Last time it didn't fail me. And, this was actually one thing I experimented with tremendously while traveling through India. As I went there with no plan or anything to do really, and I found myself in Kodaikanal, and basically just stayed in this little room until I would be told to go in some direction. Yeah, and so 6 months I spent like this, just following this voice, and slowly it was like everywhere that I went was just phenomenal, was beautiful, and every now and again it would be like, we should kind of walk through that aspect of the woods. We should go there at night. We should do something like this. And it would be a little bit scary, a little bit difficult. And following through with it, it really does never fail you if you are able to differentiate between these minds, between these voices.
Which is an unbelievable thing to do. How do you deepen the ability to listen to that voice? Is it related to silence?
It can be. So first, just deepen your ability to actually listen to another person. This is a great place to start. In the same way that we learn a lot of lessons from fine-tuning a handstand practice that apply directly to the practice of meditation, in the same way, if we really want to hear something so subtle as this voice of intuition, we need to just hear our peers. We need to hear nature. We need to practice hearing in a more accessible context. And all of those lessons that we learn, they will apply directly to hearing things that are more subtle. There's no difference. Hearing something so subtle like that, hearing your voice as it leaves your mouth, there's no difference. The only difference is that this one I can hear with these gross instruments, my ears. The other one, they're slightly more subtle instruments, and I need to hone in on their abilities.
Super well said. What are some... Do you practice meditation every day?
Yeah.
And if so, what tactics do you do?
Yeah, I hesitate originally because every day I practice meditation, absolutely, but there are some days that I don't sit. Yeah?
Exactly, yeah.
So my techniques continually evolve, and ideally they move in a more and more simplistic sense. But as far as accessible things to anyone who might hear this, the idea would be to find some type of practices that first allow the mind to wander a bit, because the mind, it doesn't like to be just boom, instantly directed, instantly made to focus. It needs a little bit of time to do whatever it wants to do. And then you need to have some techniques that actually cultivate one's ability to focus on just one thing. And for the most part, when we say meditation, in the vast population of modern peoples, meditation will be concentration. Meditation should be just developing the ability to focus single-pointedly at something. Yeah, if you can really focus at something, like wholeheartedly, give it your undivided attention, if you really can, meditation will come through that doorway. State of meditation will come through that doorway. You don't need to do things that are so complicated. Practically, one of the things that I used to do, super accessible, is a thing I created with my bird, whose name was Coco, when I was very young, actually. This would have been before coming to yoga. But she was so beautiful, and her feathers were stunning, yeah? And I would take the feathers and just for a long time sit there and gaze at the feather, yeah? So I would observe every aspect of the form, and it would go to the degree where you wouldn't notice people calling your name, mainly my mother saying, "Dinner time," just sitting in my room with this bird's feather in my hand. But the idea is that there are so many different ways to cultivate concentration. Find some ways that resonate with you and then do them daily.
Amazing. And how do you keep that concentration alive when you're downtown New York?
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, concentration, it doesn't change one place to the other. Might be a little bit more difficult with sounds and all these kinds of things coming in. That's okay. They can come. They can pull your attention out for some time. It's not a problem. In many cases, it can actually be helpful. Yeah, it's the act of actually bringing it back. without judgment, bringing it back to just that one thing that you're focusing on, the object of meditation, some will call. Bring it back time and time again, and eventually the duration to which you're actually able to focus on that object of meditation, that will start to expand until it doesn't matter where you are. Very, very quiet, silent place, very, very busy, all kinds of things going on. It doesn't matter. Yeah? You keep bringing it back to that one thing, that's the practice. You keep bringing it back.
And it can be eyes open, or your breath, or even sensation like gratitude.
Again, it can be absolutely anything. As far as we're focusing on concentration, it can be absolutely anything that resonates with you. Yeah. So things that resonated with me personally, the practice of japa, japa meditation. So having a mantra, and the way that you properly practice japa is to try and focus on that object of meditation, which is a mantra, with as many of your 5 senses as possible. Yeah. So the idea is that you would try to utilize as many different aspects of your senses to keep the focus. The senses are still going in one direction, but for example, if I'm just thinking about the sound of the mantra itself, this is one layer. I could also visualize the way that it is written. This is another layer. I could also bring to mind the aspect of creation which that mantra is representing. So for myself, thinking, for example, about the bow of Lord Rama, yeah? Every inhalation, for example, visualizing that bow being strong, every exhalation, see it being released. And if you know how to utilize the different senses in conjunction with japa meditation, it can be very, very powerful practice.
Yeah, I've never heard of it at that degree, actually.
So a lot of the things that I do and teach, they don't necessarily come from a lineage or anything like that. This would be just coming from staying at the ashram for an extended period of time. Whether or not that's something that's of value to other people, I have no idea, but I teach from the personal experience, so it helped me a lot.
Well, it seems like you're doing pretty well.
Okay. Thank you.
No, listen, the other thing, without shifting too drastically, but we
Sure.
do talk a lot about like the self and the internal world, right? I just wanted to know your opinion on what's happening globally today. Like, just in essence of where we're going as a species, and if you think that there's something of a awakening happening in the world.
Yeah, I can speak to it. Especially while I was in high school, post-secondary, studying health, wellness, and fitness, I was very, very open to educating myself on the issues within our world, of which there are many. Yeah? And I learned quite a lot about the state of affairs, and I found that my experience of life, although I seemed to know more about what was going on in the world, my experience of life didn't get any better. And also, my ability to influence and impact the world, it didn't get any better. So, the more I started to focus on what's going on out there in the world, the more frustrated I became. And in many ways, I was not contributing to that damaged society in the way that I wanted to. I was just learning about all of the bullshit, basically. So the idea, especially with yogic practice, is that you have to direct the focus in the other direction. Yeah, you have to switch where you're focusing. Focusing so much on what's going on in the world, this will honestly only ever frustrate someone. Yeah, honestly only ever frustrate someone. The real way to find change in the world is to start with just your own self. Yeah, just this one person. As far as the awakening of a global community goes, again, gauge it just by yourself. How do you feel at any given moment? Yeah, are you able to experience life truly and fully? If you can do that one thing, I very much guarantee that the world will follow relatively quick.
Well, that's that. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Gabby. Yeah, that's fun. I thought that might be a question, the state of things going on in the world.
You did?
Yeah.
Why did you think that?
Just because Momentom is very conscious about, especially like issues and different technologies for improving, the state of the world, like crypto and blockchain.
Yeah.
All of these kinds of new technologies, and they're so valid and so valuable. But even from the talk with Jeff, you're saying that they're not perfect in and of themselves. And in my opinion, it's actually like band-aids that we're just constantly creating. We don't really understand the reason we are injured. Yeah.
Why do you think we're injured?
Well, I don't think it. I know it. Yeah. It's like, why would we need something like a blockchain technology?
Because we're always evolving.
This kind of crazy corruption happening. Yeah,
well,
I'm saying it's definitely a state in the right direction. It's definitely going towards the right direction, but still, it's not complete because we're not looking in the right direction yet.
But it just feels like there's so much crazy duality happening at the same time as everyone's buying land and making, new age communities. At the same time, there's Trump being elected, or that guy in Brazil who's selling off the last remaining Amazon forest, and so it's kind of what is happening, but I really do like your insight on the more you focus outside.
Well, could you imagine for a moment if every person on the planet stopped caring about what was going on outside themselves? Do you know what would happen?
What would happen?
Everything would be perfect. If all they did was try and perfect this one thing that they live in, I guarantee the world would be perfect.
Why do people give a shit so much about control?
Control? I don't know. But we like things that we can touch. We like things that are accessible. The same reason people like handstands is because they're they're fancy.
They're fun.
They're
it's
cool,
like a plaything.
They're accessible. In the same way, we try and do all these tasks in the outside world. We don't know that a far more effective method of improvement is just to step back and focus on yourself. If you can really fine-tune, the technologies that you'll create, you basically, if you really know who you are, you'll not harm anyone.
Yeah.
It won't be possible.
Exactly.
That's the way to fix the world.
Do you ever think that we're living in... What do you think about infinite realities happening at the same time?
Again, all this kind of stuff, it looks too much in the other direction for me.
Really?
Yeah. If you want to understand anything right, so it has entertainment value, absolutely.
Yeah.
But as far as something that will actually help you improve, how does that help me improve at all? Am I going to change my life at all, knowing that there's some kind of parallel universe thing going on? Probably not. Maybe, but probably not. More effective means for improvement would just be, okay, that's out there, recognize it, this is where I'm going to focus instead. And actually, there's so many studies within the realm of science talk about micro mimicking macro, and that if you can really experience and understand what happens on a cellular level, you'll know what's happening within the universe itself.
Yeah, it just blows my fucking mind.
Right. So all of the answers, they're just right in that one.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to know about, it's just there.
My question over the thoughts was just if you have healthy thoughts, it just seems that the world around you changes, and it's almost as if it's malleable.
Oh, it does. Yeah. No, the chemistry of the thought will elicit specific hormonal response in the body. It will literally change your environment. The body will change, everything around you will change, the people, the way that you experience things will change. If you can just experience life with more higher vibrations, then it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So this is it. If you focus just this one, experience things nicely, everything will change.
I guess the thing with me is that I just want to help as many people as possible.
I know. And I'm the same way. But more and more I realize that if you really want to help people, just start there. Because we're not perfect yet. Yeah? And until we are, ultimately any form of teaching that we give is going to be in some way perverse. Because we don't fucking know. We think we do, and we're teaching from this place where we say things like we have some kind of experience of them, but we have no idea. Yeah?
No idea. But the fact that you are inspired by looking within you, does that mean you have less do you seek inspiration outside of you?
That's a good question. Like here, even with the Momentum, he asked us to write down the things that we wanted to learn. And I've never really sought advice or wanted to learn anything, because ultimately it's, again, even if like just gold comes my way, even the best teacher comes my way, which it actually has happened on many occasions now, unless this thing is primed first, it's not going to matter.
But this, you mean this thing?
This body, mind first.
Uh-huh.
This body, mind first.
Yeah, but you can
What's beyond it? Yeah, you don't even think about it for now.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was like I had the experience actually to sit with the Dalai Lama
What?
while I was in high school. Yeah, and I totally turned it down.
You totally turned down the Dalai Lama?
I didn't even know who he was. I was like, why the fuck would I want to sit with this guy? Why would I give a shit?
Oh my god.
Yeah? I did not care at all. Yeah?
Okay.
So I mean, regardless of what kinds of teachings come our way or whatever kinds of things we're asking for, it won't matter. It really won't matter. We need to focus just on this one first, make it really, really prime, and then we start to receive things in a tremendous way.
Sure, but if you never stumbled upon a yoga teacher training or Vipassana for me...
Stumble upon is the key word, though.
Right, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Well, I also, like, shit hit the fan until I had no other way out, and I realized I needed some kind of broader understanding of the world. And it just seemed to make sense because everybody seemed to be doing it. But thank God I followed that through without judging it that much.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
For more info or content from Momentom Collective, or to apply for one of our international artist residencies, visit momentomcollective.com. That's Momentom, M-O-M-E-N-T-O-M. The Momentom podcast theme you're listening to is the track Beam Me Up by our friend and producer Arterium. For more eclectic soundscapes, find Arterium on SoundCloud.